What's going on, guys? My name is Matt, and recently a friend of mine gave me the challenge of putting together a Fortnite Gaming PC for as cheap as possible while still getting decent performance. So what I did was use some parts I had on hand and a few parts I ordered online to throw together this. A pretty respectably spec'd PC with a quad-core CPU, dedicated graphics card, and plenty of RAM, all for under $150. Now, just to clarify a few things, this PC is using used parts, and while this exact build isn't super replicable, you could pretty easily throw together something similar for yourself for around the $200 price point, which I'll talk about towards the end of the video. The second is that this PC actually does include a copy of fully activated Windows 10. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the parts I used. For this build, I did what I do in a lot of my budget builds, and that's take a pre-built PC like an HP or Dell and upgrade it and change a bunch of the parts to make it fit for gaming. The system that I use for this build is the Dell Optiplex 790, which I picked up for only $36 on eBay. This was a great find at the time, and I've used it in a few videos at this point, so I figured it's time to pass this deal on to a friend who can use it to game. Now, the system came with everything a basic computer has besides a hard drive, but I upgraded a lot of the parts in it to get it to the point it's at right now. Originally, this PC came with an i3-2100, which while the i3 is fine for stuff like basic esports gaming, I knew my friend was going to need something a little more powerful to play games like Fortnite. So what I threw in its place is the i5-2400S, which I picked up for around $25 on eBay. They usually average around $30 to $35 by it now, but I watched listings for a few weeks until I found one for the price I wanted. The i5-2400S is a quad-core CPU on the Sandy Bridge architecture that can turbo up to 3.3 GHz, so while this isn't the fastest processor ever, it should get the job done and be a big step up from the i3. The CPU is sitting inside of the Dell's proprietary motherboard and being cooled by this really unique Dell CPU cooler with copper heat pipes and a decently sized aluminum fin array, both of which came with the Optiplex purchased on eBay. For RAM, the Optiplex came with 8GB of DDR3 RAM, which is plenty for low to mid 1080p gaming. This is in the form of 4 2GB sticks, so upgrading won't be that easy, but my friend really shouldn't need to upgrade anytime soon unless his computing needs drastically change. For the graphics card, I knew I needed something that was low profile. This limited my options a lot, but I was lucky to find a GTX 750 Ti a while ago for around $50 on eBay, which will work really well in this system. The 750 Ti, while it is an older card, is still really great for light 1080p gaming with 2GB of video memory and even has the ability to use stuff like NVIDIA Shadowplay for recording. The 750 Ti even beats out the GT 1030, which was another option I considered for this build. For storage, I was actually able to fit a hard drive and small SSD into the budget, which was pretty surprising. The SSD is this Corsair Force 60GB drive I got for $10 a while back on Craigslist, which is enough room for the OS and a few applications, while I also added a 500GB white label Seagate drive for everything else. These new white label drives you can pick up for just over $20 new on Amazon, and they're great options for budget PC builders looking for reliable, cheap storage. Powering the system is the included 240W Dell power supply, which while not a whole lot of power is plenty for this setup, with the 750 Ti only using up to 65 watts and the 2400S being a low TDP CPU. The system stays well below the 240W max, even while under a full gaming load. Assembling the system was pretty straightforward. I removed the cooler, cleaned and removed the old CPU, installed the i5, then reinstalled the cooler. All of the RAM was already installed, and so was the power supply. For the storage, the hard drive fit right into the caddy, and I used Velcro to attach the SSD to the slim loading optical drive slot. It did take me a while to figure out wiring for the drives, but in the end, I got it to work. The GPU slotted right into place, and while airflow is slightly restricted by the power supply, there's an intake at the front of the case that blows fresh air directly on the GPU. Once everything was put together, I installed Windows 10 on the SSD and used the Windows 7 key on the outside of the case to activate it. I then installed some games for testing on the hard drive, and I was ready to benchmark. I decided to test some games I knew my friend was wanting to play, and these are Fortnite, Overwatch, Rocket League, and CSGO, which are also a good representation of the types of esports games a lot of people are playing. So starting with Fortnite at 1080p medium settings, the system averaged 55 FPS with 1% lows of 46. This overall was a really good experience and pretty close to that 60 FPS average mark. You could definitely lower the settings a little to get a locked 60 FPS, but I found it to be perfectly playable and was able to stay competitive at these settings and frame rates. Moving on to Overwatch, I set everything in advanced to medium except for anti-aliasing, which is much harder to run than just using the medium preset, and at 1080p the system provided an average of 66 FPS with 1% lows of 48. Overall, great experience. Moving on to Rocket League, at 1080p quality settings, the system averaged 116 FPS with 1% lows of 101. Again, this was perfectly playable and you could bump the settings up a bunch if all you want is a 60 FPS average. Moving on to the last game, CSGO, in Arms Race at 1080p medium settings, the system saw an average of 132 FPS with 1% lows of 85. Again, great experience and you could bump the settings up or down for more visual quality or increase frame rates. Overall, for $150, I'm pretty happy with how this system performs and think it's going to be a great esports rig for my friend, and he could upgrade it even more in the future if he wants even more performance. So I also said at the beginning I would show you how to make something similar for around the same price. So what you need to do is buy a pre-built like this one for $80, buy a white label 500GB hard drive for $20, buy a 750 Ti like this one from AliExpress for $70, and get 4 extra gigabytes of DDR3 for around $17 like this one. All in, you'll have a system of equal or better performance for under $200, and you can even follow the guide I made a few weeks back about how to upgrade and put everything together. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up, as well as consider subscribing for more PC and tech related content in the future. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.